The lights died for half a second. In that black flash, Pamela saw it, the man's hand locking around his wine glass. Not nerves, not habit, knowing. 6 months in Seoul had taught her how to read a room the hard way, which casting directors actually wanted her, which agencies would ghost by Friday, which smiles meant nothing. Tonight her body read something colder. Something was wrong in this theater, and the hair on her arms already knew it. She didn't know yet that in less than 4 minutes, she would grab a stranger's hand, pull him onto the dance floor in front of 200 of Seoul's richest people, and save his life without knowing his name. She didn't know he would remember the girl who refused to look away for the rest of his. If you're watching this from somewhere warm tonight, Michigan, Chicago, Detroit, New York, California, San Francisco, or somewhere international, drop where you're tuning in from together with your time in the comments. And if stories like this one pull you in, hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to grab your popcorn because you are not expecting what happens next. 6 months earlier, Pamela had landed in Incheon with 2 suitcases and a portfolio she believed in more than anyone else did. She'd told herself Seoul would be different. That here, finally, someone would look past the fact that she didn't fit the mold and see what she could actually do in front of a camera. Instead, she found herself standing in casting hallways where agency assistants glanced at her, glanced at their clipboards, and said the same 4 words in careful, apologetic English. Not quite the fit. She'd learned to smile through it. She'd learned to walk out of those rooms with her shoulders back even when her chest felt hollow. What she hadn't learned, what nobody had warned her about, was how fast savings disappeared in a city that expensive, or how a visa renewal date could turn into a countdown clock ticking somewhere in the back of her mind every single night. Tonight was supposed to be nothing, a replacement job. Another model, some girl named Yuri, had backed out of a midnight fundraiser at the last possible hour, and Pamela's agent had called her in a panic, asking if she could be at the old Gumsan Theater in 90 minutes, dressed and ready, no questions asked. She hadn't asked questions. She'd needed the money too badly to ask questions. The theater itself took her breath away. A 100-year-old building gutted and rebuilt into something between a ballroom and a cathedral. Velvet curtains dyed the color of dried blood. A massive lighting rig suspended from the ceiling like a chandelier made of steel bones. Designers, business leaders, 2 actresses Pamela recognized from billboards. All of it moving and glittering under lights so bright they made her eyes water backstage. She should have felt lucky to be there. Instead, somewhere around her 3rd lap through the wings, changing from one look to the next, she started noticing things that didn't add up. A maintenance worker in gray coveralls slipping through a door marked restricted access. Not with a badge, not with a clipboard, just slipping through like he already knew no one was watching. 2 security guards who'd been posted by the VIP staircase 20 minutes ago, now nowhere to be found. A lighting technician crouched near the base of the rig, adjusting something, then walking away and leaving his toolbox open on the floor, which Pamela was fairly sure wasn't standard procedure for anyone being paid to keep 200 people safe under a few tons of steel. None of it was dramatic. None of it screamed danger. It was just wrong. Small and wrong. The way a note played slightly off-key can ruin an entire song even if you can't say exactly which note it was. She tried to shake it off. She had a job to do, a walk to nail, a rent payment due in 9 days. But as she came out from backstage for her second pass through the main floor, her eyes went straight to a man sitting alone at a table near the edge of the dance floor, directly beneath that massive lighting rig. He wasn't like the others in the room. He wasn't performing wealth the way the rest of them were. The loud laughs, the practiced charm, the constant checking to see who was watching them be important. He sat still, one hand around a glass he wasn't drinking from, watching the room the way Pamela watched casting hallways. Like he was reading it. Like something in it didn't add up to him either. She didn't decide to walk toward him. Her feet decided for her. "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else," she said, stopping in front of his table, surprising herself with how steady her voice came out. He looked up at her. Dark eyes, unreadable. The kind of face that had clearly spent years learning not to give anything away. "Is it that obvious? Dance with me." It wasn't a question. She watched something flicker behind his eyes. Confusion, maybe suspicion, maybe just the simple disorientation of a stranger asking for something with no explanation attached. "I don't dance," he said. "Everyone dances when the alternative is sitting alone looking like you're waiting for something terrible to happen." She had no idea, in that moment, exactly how right she was. He hesitated one more second. One long, unreadable second that she would replay in her mind 100 times over the following weeks. And then he stood and let her pull him toward the floor. They'd made it 4 steps. 5, maybe. She heard it before she understood it. A groan of metal, deep and wrong, cutting through the music like something ancient waking up. She turned her head just in time to see the lighting rig above his empty chair buckle, twist, and come down in a shattering wall of steel and sparks onto the exact table where he'd been sitting 30 seconds earlier. The screaming started immediately. Pamela stood frozen in the stranger's grip, staring at the wreckage where he should have been, her heart slamming so hard she could feel it in her throat. And it was only then, as security swarmed toward them from every direction, shouting words she didn't understand, that she looked up at the man's face and realized he wasn't looking at the wreckage at all. He was looking at her like he already knew exactly what had almost happened to him, and exactly who had just stopped it. The seconds after the crash didn't feel like seconds. They felt like something thick and slow, like the whole theater had been dropped underwater. Security men in dark suits closed around the stranger so fast Pamela barely saw them move. One moment, his hand was still loosely wrapped around hers. The next, she was being gently but firmly pushed backward, while 3 men formed a wall between him and the rest of the room. Someone was shouting into a radio in rapid Korean. Somewhere behind her, a woman was sobbing. Champagne glasses lay shattered across the floor where the rig had come down, steel and shredded velvet, and one crumpled white tablecloth, still smoking faintly under the emergency lights that had just kicked on. Pamela didn't move. She couldn't. She just stood there, watching the stranger disappear behind a wall of black suits, staring at the space where his chair used to be. Ma'am, you need to come with us." A hand touched her elbow, not rough, but not asking permission either. And a young security guard was steering her toward the side exit before she'd fully processed the question of whether she wanted to go. She looked back once. The stranger was gone. Not evacuated with the rest of the crowd through the main doors, not standing dazed among the other guests being checked by paramedics. Just gone, swallowed into some hallway or service exit like he'd never been there at all. She spent the next 2 hours in the back of a police cruiser, giving a statement to a tired detective who kept asking her the same 3 questions in slightly different orders. Why did you approach him? Did you know him? Had you seen him before tonight? No. She said it so many times the word stopped sounding like a real word. By the time she got home, her hands were still shaking. Her studio apartment felt too quiet, too small, the kind of small that used to feel cozy and now just felt like nowhere to hide. She sat on the edge of her bed, still in her dress, staring at the wall, replaying it. The tightening hand around the glass, the groan of metal, the way he'd looked at her, not shocked, not grateful, just aware, like he was recalculating something in real time. She told herself she'd never see him again. Rich men who traveled with 3 bodyguards didn't circle back for the models who happened to save their lives at fundraisers. That wasn't how the world worked, not for someone like her. She was wrong by roughly 14 hours. The knock on her door the next morning came at 9 a.m., and when she opened it, expecting her landlord about the rent, she found a driver in a charcoal suit standing in the hallway instead, hands folded in front of him, a black car idling on the street below her window like it belonged in a different, more expensive version of her life. "Miss Brooks," he said, in careful, practiced English, "Mr. Seo would like to see you." "Mr. Seo?" "Seo Tae-hyun." The name meant nothing to her, and everything to the driver's face. The way he said it like it should mean something. The small flicker of surprise when it clearly didn't. She almost said no. She almost closed the door and told him she had a casting to get to, which wasn't even a lie. But some part of her, the same part that had walked toward a stranger's table without deciding to, wanted answers. Needed them, actually. She grabbed her coat. The car took her not to an office building, but to a penthouse that occupied the top 3 floors of a tower overlooking the Han River, all glass and pale stone, and a silence so complete it felt engineered. Tae-hyun was waiting for her in a room with no furniture except 2 chairs and a window that turned Seoul into a toy city laid out far below. He looked different in daylight. Less like a shadow at a table, more like a man who'd clearly slept even less than she had. "You saved my life last night," he said without preamble, without offering her a seat first the way she'd expected someone like him to. "I don't say that carelessly. I want you to understand I know exactly what almost happened, and I know exactly what you did. I didn't do anything. I asked you to dance. You asked me to dance 30 seconds before 3 tons of steel came down on the chair I'd been sitting in for 20 minutes. His voice was even, controlled, but something underneath it wasn't. People don't do that by accident, Ms. Brooks, not with that kind of timing. It was an accident. Mine, I don't know. Something felt wrong. I wasn't trying to save anyone. She heard how strange it sounded even as she said it. I didn't even know your name until this morning. Something shifted behind his eyes, not quite relief, not quite disbelief. He studied her the way he'd studied the room the night before, like he was reading something he couldn't quite decide whether to trust. My name, he said slowly, is the CEO of Tae Holdings. That's what you'll find if you look me up. Real estate, shipping, 3 hotel chains. A pause, just long enough for her to notice it. That's the version of my name that's true in daylight. Pamela felt something cold settle low in her stomach. And at night? He didn't answer that. Instead, he stood, walked to the window, and looked down at the city like it was a chessboard he'd been playing on for longer than she could imagine. You should go home, Ms. Brooks, he said finally, his back still to her. Forget the theater. Forget my name. That would be the safest thing for you. He turned around, and for the first time she saw something that looked almost like guilt cross his face. But I don't think it's going to be that simple anymore. Not after last night. Not after what someone already knows you saw. Pamela left the penthouse with more questions than she'd walked in with, and a business card with no company name on it, just a phone number, handwritten, tucked into her palm by the driver as he opened the car door. In case, was all he said. She told herself she wouldn't use it. She told herself a lot of things that week that turned out not to be true. The first sign came 2 days later, on a Tuesday, when she noticed the same black motorcycle parked outside her building that she'd seen idling near the coffee shop that morning. She told herself Seoul was full of black motorcycles. She told herself that twice more before she stopped believing it. The second sign was worse. A text arrived on her phone from a number she didn't recognize. No words, just a photo. Her walking out of her apartment that morning, taken from across the street, no message attached, none needed. She sat on her kitchen floor for 20 minutes after that one, phone clutch so tight her knuckles ached, before she finally dialed the number from the card. I need you to explain what's happening to me, she said, the second the line connected, not bothering with hello. There was a pause. Then Tae-hyun's voice, quieter than she remembered it. Someone's watching you. I know that. I've known that for 2 days. What I don't know is why. Because the person who tried to kill me at that fundraiser knows their plan failed, and they know it failed because of you. A breath, controlled, deliberate. You weren't supposed to be a variable, Ms. Brooks. Now you're the only witness who can place a man where he shouldn't have been standing that night. That makes you dangerous to the wrong people, and it makes you mine to protect, whether either of us wanted that. Mine to protect. She hated how much that landed somewhere she didn't expect. I don't need protecting, she said, even as her voice cracked slightly on the last word. I need you to make it stop. I can't make it stop yet, but I can make sure it doesn't reach you. A pause. There's a man named Jin Woo-suk. He heads my security. He'll come to your building tonight. Let him. If your chest is tightening right now the way Pamela's was, if some part of you already knows this story is about to ask her to trust a man she has every reason to fear, stay with us and let us know in the comments if you'd have opened that door. She almost didn't. She stood in her hallway for a full minute that evening, staring at the peephole, watching a broad-shouldered man in a plain gray jacket standing perfectly still on the other side, not knocking again, not leaving either. Just waiting, the way people wait when they already know you'll open the door eventually. She opened it. Ms. Brooks. Woo-suk's English was clipped, efficient, no wasted warmth in it. I'll be outside. You won't see me unless you need to. That's not exactly comforting. It's not meant to be comforting. It's meant to be true. He glanced past her, once, into the apartment, cataloging something. Exits, maybe, or windows, before looking back at her. You're safer than you were an hour ago. That's all I can promise you tonight. The days that followed blurred into a strange new rhythm. Pamela learned to recognize Woo-suk's presence without seeing him. a car that idled a block down when she left for castings, a stillness in certain corners of certain rooms that she came to understand meant someone was watching over her, not against her. She hated it and found herself grateful for it in the same breath, sometimes within the same hour. And Tae-hyun kept appearing at the edges of her days in ways she couldn't quite explain to herself. A car sent to take her to an audition when her original ride canceled. A message asking, simply, "Did you eat today?" That she answered honestly for reasons she didn't examine too closely. He never explained himself further than he had to. He never tried to buy her comfort with wealth the way she'd expected a man like him to. He just kept showing up, in small, careful ways, like a man testing whether trust could be rebuilt one quiet gesture at a time. It was on a night 9 days after the fundraiser that everything cracked open a little wider. She'd agreed to meet him, not summoned this time. Agreed, which felt important even if she couldn't say exactly why. On the rooftop of his building, the city spread out beneath them in 1,000 small lights. He didn't speak for a long time, just stood at the railing, hands in his pockets, looking at Seoul like it owed him something it hadn't paid yet. "I didn't inherit this life," he said finally, without her asking. "I built it, piece by piece over 11 years, starting with nothing but a debt I didn't create and a man who believed I could pay it off in ways that weren't legal." His jaw tightened. "I've made choices I don't talk about. People who trusted me and paid for it. People I trusted who paid for it worse." "Why are you telling me this now?" He turned to look at her, and for the first time since the theater, she saw something in his face that wasn't controlled at all. "Because you keep looking at me like you're trying to decide if I'm worth being afraid of," he said quietly. "And I'd rather you decide that with the truth in front of you than the version of me that's easier to hate." Pamela's throat tightened. She thought about the photo on her phone, the motorcycle outside her building, the steel rig collapsing onto an empty chair. All of it circling back somehow to this one quiet, unguarded man standing in front of her with his walls finally down. "There's someone else, isn't there?" she said slowly, piecing it together in real time. "Someone who knew exactly where you'd be sitting that night. Someone close enough to arrange it." Something in his expression closed, just slightly, like a door easing shut. "Yes," he said, "there's someone else." He didn't say the name yet, but she watched it sit behind his eyes, heavy and old, like a wound that had never fully healed. And somewhere deep in her chest, Pamela understood that whatever came next wasn't going to be the end of the danger. It was only the beginning of it. His name was Kwon Do-yun, and when Tae-hyun finally said it 3 nights later, sitting across from her in a car outside a jazz club tucked into a side street she'd never noticed before, it came out of him like something he'd been carrying in his throat for years. "We built this together," he said. "Every company, every deal, every dollar. I trusted him more than I trusted my own judgment." His hands were still on the wheel, though the car hadn't moved in minutes. 11 years ago, he made a decision that cost people their lives to protect our profits. I found out, I stopped it. And in doing that, I took everything that was supposed to be his to inherit and kept it for myself instead. So this is revenge. This is what happens when 2 men who built an empire together decide the other one stole it. He finally looked at her. "Tonight, I need you to trust me in a way I haven't asked you to yet." The jazz club was small, warm, low-lit, the kind of place that felt like a secret even before anything happened. A meeting had been arranged, a supposed truce, brokered through a mutual contact, a chance to talk before things escalated further. Pamela wasn't supposed to be inside for the meeting itself. She was supposed to wait at the bar, visible, ordinary, a woman having a drink while powerful men spoke quietly in a back booth. She was 3 sips into a drink she wasn't really tasting when the first gunshot cracked through the room. Everything after that happened in fragments, screaming. Bodies hitting the floor, some diving for cover, some simply frozen. Woo Seok's hand closing around her arm and yanking her down behind the bar so hard her knee cracked against the wood. More gunfire, closer this time, answered by gunfire from somewhere near the back booth. And through the chaos, through the smoke and the overturned tables, Pamela caught a glimpse of Tae-hyun that she would never be able to unsee. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't calling for help. He moved through that room like violence was a language he'd been fluent in long before she ever met him. Controlled, precise, terrifyingly calm, disarming a man twice his size with emotion so fast she barely registered it before it was over. His face in that moment belonged to a stranger, not the man who'd asked, quietly, whether she'd eaten that day. Someone else entirely. It was over in under 2 minutes. It felt like an hour. If your heart is pounding right now the way hers was, if you're starting to wonder whether love can survive the truth of who someone really is, comment below and tell us honestly, could you love a man like this? Because what Pamela discovers next changes everything she thought she understood. And if you'd like to support First Epic Tales by Liam and help us continue creating more original stories, you can show us some love through the support link in the video description. She didn't speak in the car afterward. Neither did he. Blood, not his, she realized with a wave of nausea, had dried along one knuckle, and he hadn't bothered to clean it, like he'd forgotten it was there, or like it simply didn't register anymore. Say something, he finally said as the city blurred past the windows. I don't know what to say. Her voice came out smaller than she wanted it to. I just watched you become someone I don't recognize. That man in there is real, Pamela. He's as real as the one who sends a car when your ride cancels. He said it without defensiveness, without asking for forgiveness. Just the truth, laid flat between them. I won't pretend otherwise to make this easier for you. I've spent 11 years being both of those men. I don't know how to be only the one you'd prefer. She sat with that for a long time, watching the reflections of streetlights slide across his knuckles, across the dried blood he still hadn't wiped away. I'm not asking you to be someone else, she said finally, surprising herself with how true it felt as she said it. I just need to understand which one of you decides what happens next. Because Do-yun isn't finished. Everyone in that room knew that. I could feel it. No, Tae-hyun admitted quietly. He isn't finished. Tonight was a message, not an ending. He wanted me to know he could reach me anywhere, even somewhere I thought was safe. His jaw tightened. And now he knows something else too. He knows you were there. He knows what you mean to me, even if I haven't fully admitted that to myself yet. The words landed between them, and neither of them moved to pick them up. Outside, Seoul kept moving, indifferent, glittering, unaware that somewhere in its glass towers, a war 11 years in the making had just found its next target. And that target, Pamela realized with a chill that had nothing to do with the night air, might not be Tae-hyun at all anymore. It might be her. 3 days later, an offer came through her agency that should have felt like the answer to every prayer she'd whispered since landing in Incheon 8 months ago. A headlining spot in an international runway show, the kind of opportunity models waited entire careers for and never received. She should have felt nothing but joy reading that email. Instead, staring at the invitation on her screen, all she could think about was a jazz club soaked in gunfire, a man's bloodied knuckles resting on a steering wheel, and a name, Kwon Do-yun, that now lived permanently somewhere behind her ribs, like a held breath she couldn't release. Because some part of her already understood what Do-yun would see in that invitation too, not just her biggest opportunity, his. The runway show was held inside a converted shipyard warehouse on the edge of the Han. Glass walls rebuilt around old steel bones, 600 seats filled with editors, buyers, and cameras from 4 continents. Pamela stood backstage in a gown the color of dark wine, her hands steadier than she expected them to be, and told herself that whatever happened tonight, she had already survived worse than nerves. She didn't know Do-yun's men were already inside the building. Tae-hyun had insisted on coming, not backstage, not close enough to be seen with her, but seated in the audience, close enough to watch, close enough that Woo-seok's people had spent 2 days quietly checking every entrance, every vendor badge, every face on the guest list. It hadn't been enough. It was never going to be enough, not against a man who'd spent 11 years learning exactly how Tae-hyun thought. The first models were already walking when Woo-seok's voice came low and urgent through the earpiece Pamela hadn't wanted to wear. Movement backstage, East Corridor, 2 men, no credentials. A pause, sharper this time. Pamela, stay in the lineup, do not deviate, do not run. She kept walking toward the wings, her pulse hammering under a calm, practiced face, watching the show continue exactly as it was supposed to. Lights, music, cameras flashing, an audience with no idea that somewhere behind the black curtain a different kind of performance was already underway. She caught one glimpse of Tae-hyun rising from his seat near the front row, unhurried, deliberate, moving toward the side exit like a man who'd rehearsed this exact moment in his mind 100 times already. What happened next, she would only ever piece together in fragments. a struggle near the loading dock that never reached the audience's eyes or ears, security peeling away from their posts in coordinated silence. Detective Nam Sung-jae's team, already stationed outside on evidence gathered from the jazz club shooting, closing in through the same service entrance Do-yun's men had used to slip inside. She heard later that Do-yun had been waiting near the East Corridor himself, that when Tae-hyun found him there, neither man raised his voice, that whatever passed between them in those final minutes, 11 years of partnership, betrayal, and grief compressed into a handful of sentences, ended not with more violence, but with Do-yun standing motionless as police moved in around him, his empire collapsing in real time on phones and monitors he could no longer control. Pamela finished her walk down that runway not knowing any of it yet. She only knew, stepping back behind the curtain into the sudden hush of backstage, that Tae-hyun was standing there waiting for her, alive, unharmed, his eyes finding hers before she'd even fully processed that the show was over. Neither of them said anything for a moment. There didn't seem to be words sized right for it. "It's finished," he said finally, quietly, like he still didn't quite believe it himself. "Do-yun's organization is coming apart tonight. Financial records, shell companies, everything Detective Nam needed. It's all being seized right now as we're standing here. And you? I'm still standing here." Something in his voice cracked open, just slightly, the way it had on the rooftop weeks ago. "I didn't think I would be, walking in tonight. I made peace with that possibility before I sat down in that audience." Pamela felt something in her chest give way. Not relief, exactly. Something heavier and more complicated than that. "You should have told me." "Would you have let me come?" "No," she admitted, and something that was almost a laugh escaped her, exhausted and real. "I would have chained you to that penthouse myself. If this story has moved you even a little tonight, if some part of you understands what it costs to love someone carrying that much darkness and still choose them anyway, this is the moment to comment the biggest lesson you're taking from Pamela and Tae-hyun's story. Hit subscribe and share this with someone who needs a reminder that survival and love aren't opposites. They're often the same fight. The weeks that followed didn't erase what had happened. Pamela still woke some nights with her heart racing, reaching instinctively for a phone that no longer buzzed with anonymous photographs. Tae-hyun still carried the weight of 11 years he couldn't undo with one arrest. One dismantled empire, one long overdue reckoning. Neither of them pretended healing worked faster than it actually did, but something had shifted, quietly, permanently, in the space between the two of them. He stopped disappearing into unexplained silences without telling her where he'd gone. She stopped flinching every time his phone lit up on the table between them. Trust, she was learning, wasn't built in rooftop confessions or jazz club gunfights. It was built in the small, unremarkable Tuesday evenings that followed them, the ordinary dinners, the quiet mornings where nothing needed to be survived at all. Months later, Pamela walked onto an international runway in Milan, cameras flashing, her name finally spoken by people who used to look past her, and found Tae-hyun exactly where she knew he'd be. Not backstage pulling strings, not surrounded by security scanning for threats that no longer existed, just seated quietly in the audience, watching her the way he had that very first night, before either of them understood what a single dance was about to cost and what it would eventually save. She thought sometimes, in the stillness after a show, about the version of herself who'd walked into that theater 8 months ago, believing she had nothing left to offer anyone. She thought about how close she'd come to sitting alone at her own table that night, minding her business, letting a stranger's fate unfold without her. She was glad every single time that some quiet, unexplainable instinct in her had refused to let that happen. Because sometimes the bravest thing a person ever does isn't chosen with logic at all. Sometimes it's just a hand reaching out toward a stranger, a simple question, "Dance with me," spoken seconds before everything changes, for both of you, forever. Here is a short summary about Pamela's story. Pamela Brooks, a struggling model in Seoul, saves a stranger's life at a fundraiser by pulling him onto the dance floor seconds before a lighting rig crushes his empty seat. The stranger, Seo Tae-hyun, turns out to be a powerful CEO with a hidden criminal past. Someone tries to silence Pamela for what she witnessed, so Tae-hyun places her under his security chief's protection. As trust builds between them, he reveals the truth. An old partner, Kwon Do-yun, betrayed him years ago and wants revenge. A jazz club ambush shows Pamela the ruthless side of the man she's falling for. Weeks later, Do-yun sets a trap at Pamela's biggest career break, an international runway show. But Tae-hyun and a detective's investigation bring his empire down for good. Months later, Pamela walks a Milan runway with Tae-hyun watching proudly in the audience. Both of them changed by the night. One simple dance saved 2 lives. If you enjoy the stories we share on First Epic Tales by Liam and would like to support the channel, you can show us some love through the link in the description. Your support helps us continue creating more original stories and bringing new characters and unforgettable moments to life. Thank you for being part of this journey.